Aiden stood at the gates of Riverside Middle School, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the straps of his backpack. The air felt thick, heavy with anticipation and the smell of fresh-cut grass from the school's courtyard. Today wasn't just any day, it was the first day of his new life. Aiden was no stranger to new beginnings, but this one felt different. His heart raced as he took a deep breath, his mind replaying the same thought over and over. You can do this. Just be brave. The car accident that had scarred his face a year ago was still fresh in his memory. The doctors had done their best, but nothing could fully erase the deep lines and patches of skin that disfigured his once youthful appearance. Every glance in the mirror reminded him of what had been taken from him. And now, as he entered a new school, Aiden was afraid of the stares, the whispers, and the judgments that awaited him. He pushed the heavy door open, stepping into the bustling hallways of Riverside Middle. The walls were decorated with posters announcing the upcoming school play, a science fair, and sports events. It all seemed so normal. But to Aiden, everything felt out of place. He could already feel the eyes on him. The curious glances from students in the hall, the muffled whispers, and the sharp stares that seemed to follow his every move. As Aiden made his way to the classroom, he overheard a group of boys talking nearby. One of them laughed loudly, pointing in his direction. "Did you see that guy's face? What happened to him?" the boy asked, his voice rising a little too high for Aiden's comfort. Aiden quickly looked down, his cheeks burning with embarrassment. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his thoughts swirling in confusion. Why couldn't I just be like everyone else? He wondered. It was as if all his worst fears were unfolding in front of him. He just wanted to disappear. But he didn't. Instead, Aiden walked on, his steps a little faster now, though not quite running. He had promised himself that he wouldn't let anyone's opinions control his life. That's what his mom had told him before he left home. People are going to look, but that doesn't change who you are. She said it with such warmth, her voice full of hope. And though Aiden knew she meant well, the sting of those first looks was hard to shake off. When he finally reached his classroom, he paused at the door, taking a moment to gather his courage. The door creaked open as he stepped inside, greeted by the warm light filtering through the windows and the low murmur of other students chatting. The room fell silent for a split second when everyone noticed him. Then, slowly, the whispers started. A few students nudged each other, their eyes darting to Aiden and then quickly away, as if trying to pretend they hadn't noticed. He found his seat near the back, far from the window, and sat down quietly. Aiden could hear the faint sound of a pencil tapping on a desk nearby, but he didn't dare look up. He just stared at the desk in front of him, willing the day to pass faster. The teacher, Mrs. Jacobs, stood at the front, introducing herself and outlining the class schedule, but Aiden couldn't focus. His mind was elsewhere, on the faces he had seen, on the voices he had heard. By lunchtime, things hadn't improved. In the cafeteria, Aiden grabbed his tray, feeling the weight of everyone's attention on him as he made his way to an empty table in the corner. He sat down, pushing the food around on his plate without much appetite. A few students walked past, giving him curious glances, but no one sat with him. The laughter and chatter of the other kids filled the air, but it felt like it was happening in a different world, one where Aiden didn't belong. Maybe it would be easier to leave, he thought, the urge to run away becoming almost overwhelming. He could just tell his mom that he didn't feel well and go home. But no, he couldn't let fear win. Not again. Just as Aiden was about to give in to the urge to leave, a girl with short curly hair walked by his table. She paused, her eyes flicking briefly to him before she looked away. Aiden could feel his chest tighten. Was she going to laugh too? But she didn't. Instead, she smiled. Just a small, friendly smile, and continued walking to another table, leaving Aiden to wonder if maybe things weren't so hopeless after all. Maybe there was still a chance he could find his place here. Even if it seemed impossible right now, he wouldn't give up. After all, this was only the beginning. The following week, Aiden found himself reluctantly signed up for an after-school club, the Creative Writing Club. It wasn't that he had a passion for writing, but it seemed like a good way to avoid being alone during the long hours after school. He had hoped to slip in quietly, sit in the corner, and keep to himself, but things never went according to plan. When he entered the room, he was greeted by the usual mix of curiosity and uncomfortable silence. A few kids glanced his way, but no one spoke to him. He took a seat in the back, far from the others, and opened his notebook, hoping to blend into the background. It was then that he noticed her Leah. She was sitting at the table near the window, her bright eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity. Her long brown hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves, and she had an air of confidence that Aiden couldn't quite place. Unlike the others, who seemed content to keep their distance, Leah was different. She seemed unbothered by what others thought of her, and her eyes kept flicking toward him, as if she were waiting for something. After a few minutes, Leah stood up and made her way over to Aiden's table, her footsteps light but purposeful. Aiden stiffened, not sure if she was coming to talk to him or if she was just looking for an empty seat. "Hey," she said, her voice warm and friendly. "I'm Leah. I noticed you're new here." Aiden felt a surge of unease. He wasn't used to being approached. Yeah, just started last week," he replied, keeping his eyes on his notebook. Leah smiled, unbothered by his awkwardness. "I get it," she said, sitting down across from him. "The first week can be tough. Everyone's trying to figure out who they are and where they belong. It can be exhausting." Aiden looked up at her, unsure of how to respond. He was still trying to process why she was talking to him. "I guess," he mumbled, shrugging. Leah didn't seem to mind his short responses. "You know, I heard you're into writing. That's cool. I actually love writing too." She paused and gave him a thoughtful look. "You're not really talking to anyone, though. Are you okay?" Aiden shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to explain the stares, the whispers, the way it felt to be the one who was different. But for some reason, Leah's presence felt safe. There was no judgment in her eyes, just understanding. People keep staring," Aiden said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know why. I just want to fit in. But it feels like they can't stop looking. I hate it." Leah nodded, her gaze steady and kind. "I get it," she said. "My dad's a journalist. He's been covering all these stories about how people are treated differently because of things they can't control. Whether it's race, gender, or even just the way someone looks. People judge, but they don't know the full story. It's not fair." Aiden felt a weight lifting off his chest as she spoke. It was the first time someone had ever acknowledged how hard it was, without trying to fix it or make him feel better with empty words. Leah seemed to understand that sometimes it wasn't about fixing the problem. It was just about being heard. "You know," Leah continued, "everyone has something that makes them different. Some of us just wear it on the outside. But that doesn't make us any less valuable. And it definitely doesn't mean we should hide who we are." Aiden met her gaze, surprised by her words. No one had ever said something like that to him before. It felt reassuring, like maybe, just maybe, things could get better. "Maybe you could share your story with the group," Leah suggested. "It might help you feel more connected. They might not understand right away, but at least they'll know the real you." Aiden's stomach twisted at the thought. He wasn't sure he was ready to share his story with anyone, let alone a group of strangers. But there was something in Leah's encouragement that made him consider it. Maybe it wasn't about changing how others saw him. It was about showing them who he really was. Over the next few weeks, Leah became his first real friend at Riverside Middle. She didn't push him to talk about his struggles, but she was always there, sitting next to him in class, sharing jokes, and even helping him with his writing. She made him feel like he wasn't alone. And bit by bit, Aiden found himself looking forward to the club meetings, not because of the writing, but because of the people, especially Leah. One afternoon, as they sat together after school, Leah turned to him with a smile. "You know, Aiden, you're a pretty great person. I think people just need to see that. They need to see that we all have something special about us, even if it's not always obvious." Aiden smiled shyly, grateful for her friendship. He didn't know if he was ready to open up completely, but for the first time since his accident, He felt like there was hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could find his place after all. Leah's words echoed in his mind long after their conversation ended. You're special. Maybe she was right. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to believe it. It all started with a single article. Leah's father, Mr. Miller, had been working on a piece about bullying in local schools. He had been writing about how students who were different often faced challenges in finding acceptance, and he wanted to tell the story of someone who had experienced it firsthand. That's when Leah mentioned Aiden. After some encouragement, Aiden reluctantly agreed to share his story, hoping it might help others understand what he was going through. The article, titled Aiden's Story, The Price of Difference, was published in the local newspaper and quickly found its way online. The headline was striking. In a world that stares, Aiden finds his voice. Leah's dad had done a good job of telling Aiden's story with honesty and empathy, and it struck a chord with many people in the community. The piece sparked conversations about the importance of empathy and the impact of bullying on students' mental health. At first, the response was overwhelmingly positive. People left supportive comments on the online article, sending messages of kindness and encouragement. Aiden started receiving messages from students at other schools, sharing their own experiences of being bullied or feeling different. It felt like for the first time, he wasn't alone in the world. He started to feel proud of his decision to speak up. But as the article gained more attention, it began to attract some unwanted eyes. Comments on the article turned sour. Some people accused Aiden of seeking attention. Others mocked his appearance, claiming that he was just looking for sympathy. Some even said cruel things, calling him names like Scarface and attention seeker. Aiden's stomach turned every time he saw one of these comments. He tried to avoid reading the responses, but it was impossible. The negative comments spread like wildfire across social media, and soon people in the halls at school started whispering about the article. The same students who had once looked at him with curiosity were now looking at him with pity or contempt. It felt like every move he made was being scrutinized. One afternoon, Aiden sat alone at lunch, his tray untouched in front of him. He stared down at his sandwich, the words in his head louder than the sound of the cafeteria. Why did I let them do this? He thought, feeling a knot tighten in his chest. I didn't want to be the center of attention. I didn't want anyone to look at me like this. Leah sat down across from him, her brow furrowed in concern. Hey, Aiden, I saw the article. It's getting a lot of attention, huh? She said, her voice gentle. Aiden didn't look up. Yeah, too much attention, he muttered. Some people are saying awful things about me. Leah nodded, understanding the weight of his words. I'm sorry, Aiden, but you know people online can be really harsh. They hide behind their screens and forget that there's a real person on the other side. I didn't think it would be like this, Aiden said, his voice cracking. I thought if I told my story, things would get better. But now it feels like I'm just being judged even more. Leah leaned in, her eyes kind but firm. Aiden, you didn't do anything wrong by sharing your story. You're helping people see that we all have our struggles. But you can't let the nasty comments define you. People are afraid of what they don't understand. But that doesn't mean you should stop being who you are. Aiden looked up at her, searching her face for any hint of doubt. There was none. But what if they're right, he whispered. What if I'm just a joke to them? Leah shook her head firmly. No, Aiden. You're not a joke. You're real. And the people who matter, they see you for who you are, not for what you look like. It's going to take time, but you'll find your way. Just don't let the noise drown out the truth. For the first time in days, Aiden felt a spark of hope. Leah's words were a lifeline in the storm of negativity. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. Maybe, just maybe, he could get through this. But he wasn't sure yet. The pain of the insults still lingered, and the weight of being misunderstood was heavy. As he left the cafeteria later that day, Aiden couldn't help but glance at the students who had been whispering about him. Their eyes flicked away when they saw him. But there was something different in their gaze now. Less judgment, more curiosity. Maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed. Maybe, with time, they would come to understand. But for now, all he could do was try to hold on to the quiet strength Leah had given him. It's not about them, he thought as he walked down the hallway. It's about me. I get to choose who I am. The weight of the negative comments still lingered on Aiden's shoulders, like an unshakable shadow. Each day felt harder than the last. His self-esteem, which had once been lifted by the support of his family and a few kind friends, now seemed to crumble under the harsh words of strangers. At school, he could barely focus in class, and when he walked through the halls, he felt the stares that made him wish he could disappear. He spent most of his time hiding in the back of the library or sitting alone in the cafeteria, staring blankly at his lunch. It was during one of these lonely afternoons that something happened, a moment that would change everything. It was a Saturday, and Aiden had agreed to meet Leah at the local park. They had been talking about meeting up more often, trying to do something normal, something to distract from the stress that had been consuming them both. The day was warm, the sun shining brightly as children played in the distance, and families gathered on the grassy fields. But the peace of the park would soon be shattered by an unexpected event. Aiden and Leah were sitting on a bench near the walking path when a loud cry pierced the air. They both turned, instinctively standing up to see what had happened. A few yards away, an elderly woman had collapsed on the ground. Her cane had fallen beside her, and she was clutching her chest, her face contorted in pain. Panic spread quickly among the people nearby as the woman struggled to breathe. Aiden felt his heart race. The instinct to run to avoid being caught in a situation where he might be judged or criticized was powerful. He looked over at Leah, who was already moving toward the woman, her eyes full of determination. "Aiden, come on," Leah called to him, her voice urgent. "We need to help her." Aiden froze. The fear in his chest was overwhelming. What if I do something wrong? What if I make a mistake? His mind raced with doubts, and for a moment he almost turned away. But then he saw the look on the woman's face, her desperate need for help, and he realized that his fear couldn't stop him. Not this time. Aiden took a deep breath and ran toward Leah, who was already kneeling by the woman's side. People were gathering around, unsure of what to do. Aiden knelt beside Leah and gently placed his hand on the woman's shoulder. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Leah asked, her voice calm but firm. The woman nodded weakly. "We need to call 911, Aiden said, his voice shaking slightly. He pulled out his phone, his hand still trembling from the adrenaline, and quickly dialed for help. Meanwhile, Leah spoke to the woman, trying to keep her conscious. "Stay with us, okay? Help is on the way," Leah reassured the woman, her voice steady. Aiden's mind raced. He had never been in a situation like this before, but he remembered what his mom had taught him, how important it was to stay calm in emergencies. He looked around at the small crowd that had gathered, all of them unsure of what to do. His voice, though soft, was clear. "Everyone, please move back," he called. "Give her space. Someone needs to keep an eye out for the ambulance." A few people nodded and stepped back, but Aiden could see the hesitation in their eyes. They were waiting for someone to take charge. He realized that someone had to act, someone had to lead the way, and that someone, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, had to be him. Just as he finished speaking, a man in the crowd stepped forward with a first aid kit, but Aiden was the one who continued to direct the others, telling them where to stand and how to stay out of the way. His voice grew steadier with every second, his earlier fear fading as he focused on what needed to be done. Soon, the ambulance arrived, and the woman was carefully lifted into the paramedics' care. As the crowd began to disperse, Aiden looked at Leah, who was smiling at him with pride. "You did it, Aiden," she said softly, her voice full of admiration. "You were incredible." Aiden's heart was still pounding from the rush of adrenaline, but he felt something else too, a sense of calm. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had done something meaningful, something that mattered. Word about the incident spread quickly through the community. Local news outlets reported it the next day, highlighting the quick thinking of two young people who stepped up to help in an emergency. Aiden's name was mentioned in the article not as the boy with the scars, but as the boy who helped save a life. People who had once only noticed him for his appearance were now noticing his courage. Students who had once looked away now approached him with respect. He began to hear whispers, but this time they were different, admiring, appreciative. "Did you hear about Aiden?" one student said in the hallway. "He's the one who helped that lady at the park. He's a hero." Aiden felt something shift inside him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't care about the stares or the whispers. What mattered now was what he had done, not how he looked. His courage had spoken louder than his appearance ever could. Leah was right. Sometimes, people are afraid of what they don't understand. But when you show them who you really are, it makes all the difference. As the days went on, Aiden found it easier to face the world. He realized that he had more power than he thought, not just to change how others saw him, but to change how he saw himself. And that was a power no one could take away. The days that followed the incident in the park were a blur for Aiden. He had helped the woman. Her name was Mrs. Thompson, and she had been taken to the hospital, where she received the care she needed. The whole community rallied around her, offering support and prayers for her recovery. But for Aiden, it felt like something had shifted within himself. Something deeper than just the relief of helping someone in need. He had done something brave, something that mattered, and it had made him feel more alive than he had in a long time. The story of Aiden's courage spread quickly through school and the community. News outlets picked up the story, and soon the young boy who had once shied away from attention found himself at the center of a new kind of focus. The local news called him the boy who stepped up when it counted, and people in the community started calling him the Miracle Boy, a name that stuck in the weeks that followed. At school, things began to change. The students who had once whispered behind his back now came up to him with friendly smiles and kind words. Some even apologized for their earlier judgments, admitting they hadn't understood what he had gone through. Aiden was surprised at how genuine their words were, and how quickly the atmosphere around him began to shift. Leah, as always, was by his side. "I told you," she said one day as they sat together on the steps outside the school. "You just needed to show people who you really are, and now they get it." Aiden smiled at her, his heart lighter than it had been in months. "I didn't expect this," he admitted. "I didn't expect people to actually understand. It's like they see me now, not just the scars." Leah nodded, her eyes sparkling. "You didn't just show them your scars, Aiden. You showed them your heart, and that's what made all the difference." As the weeks went on, Aiden found himself growing more confident, not because of the attention he was getting, but because of the way he had learned to view himself. No longer was he the boy with the scars, the boy who was different. He was someone with a story of courage and kindness that had inspired others. His scars, once something he had hated, were now part of who he was, a symbol of strength and resilience. He started to spend more time with his classmates, joining in on group projects, and even participating in school events. People no longer looked at him with pity, but with respect. They saw his kindness, his bravery, and the way he had stepped up when others were afraid. The label of Miracle Boy wasn't just about the moment he helped Mrs. Thompson. It was about how he had changed, how he had faced his fears and embraced who he truly was. One afternoon after school, Aiden found himself standing in front of the mirror in the bathroom, looking at his reflection. The scars on his face were still there, but they no longer filled him with shame. Instead, he saw a young man who had learned to live with his imperfections and had, in doing so, found his strength. He thought about everything he had been through, the loneliness, the bullying, the negative comments, and how it had all led to this moment. He thought about the friends he had made, the support he had received, and how he had learned that it was okay to be different. In that moment, Aiden realized that he had changed, not because of what others had done for him, but because of what he had done for himself.